I think food justice is all about making sure that people have the tools and resources that they need to make the food choices that they want.
Food justice, the right to have healthy food in abundance in your home or in your community.
Justice in the food practice is we need to make healthy food available for everyone, independent of their income, independent of their skin color, independent of where they live. Everybody needs to have access to those basic foods that keep them healthy.
Food justice to me, I think, means food is available to those who need it when they need it. And that when they need it, there's choice available, and that part of that choice includes some healthy choices.
I got some green beans in here.
Are they nice?
Oh, they're beautiful. Highest quality I picked this morning.
So I think food justice for some would be access to the opportunities of healthier items.
It helps us get through the day and nutritional value.
To me, it's doing justice with the food, to care for it as you would care for it in your own fridge at home, and to make sure that it's being used by somebody who needs it instead of being put into a landfill somewhere.
It's about access to food, but it's also access to the story around food, and then the implication of that story on whatever community is telling it.
Don't mind me while I micro adjust this camera here so folks can see me better. Okay, I think that looks good, so okay, we're gonna go back. While writing this sermon, I began crafting something I felt would go well with folks. I had it in my mind that I would tell you about some of the many layers of food justice. I planned on pulling from our UU sources and pointing out how food and feast have been present throughout religious communities for as long as history tells us. Adam and Eve got kicked out of Eden for eating an apple. The tale of Jesus eating 5,000 from 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Day of the Dead, where people place foods on altars for the beloveds who have passed. Rosh Hashanah, apples dipped in honey to celebrate a sweet new year. The Muslim festival of sacrifice, where the sacrifice refers to an animal in remembrance of the story of Ibrahim and his son Ismail. How mooncakes are the hallmark food of the Mid-Autumn Festival, a cultural and religious holiday celebrated during the fall harvest. And I'm sure there's other food offering traditions amongst the cultures here that someone can share with me afterward. But in my dreams, my ancestors came to me and told me I needed to go deeper. So I planned on weaving those above with a story from a local city of mine, El Cajon, and their ban on feeding the homeless from starting in October 2017. How a group of activists came together, dubbed themselves Break the Ban, and shared food in public spaces until they were cited. In comparison, the city of El Cajon flexed its muscle with a $1,000 fine and even possible jail time for breaking the ban. And it wasn't until January of 2018 that the group was finally cited. And why that mattered is that it could now be challenged in court, because the following week, the ban was lifted. Still, my ancestors returned to my dreams and said to go deeper. So I began writing about food justice as a call to action after the immigration raids in chicken processing plants. In raids held on August 7, 2019, Agents arrested 680 immigrant workers from 7 different chicken processing plants in central Mississippi. That's the largest single state immigration enforcement operation in US history. I wanted to call your spirits to this piece because before these raids, those workers were union organizing for better working conditions and higher wages. As things were looking to be in the hands of the workers, the owners, Koch Foods, quietly requested a raid on their plants. I wanted to weave in how the fight for unions is part of food justice. Again, my ancestors came and told me I needed to go deeper. And I asked them, how can I go deeper? Give me some kind of a sign if you're gonna come to me this way. So the next day, I started writing about wages for migrant farm workers. In September of 2020, the US Department of Agriculture announced that it no longer intends to collect data on the money paid to those who keep Americans fed. Today's migrant farm workers make, on average, just under $13 an hour. And it's a rate that varies by region. By failing to conduct the traditional agricultural labor survey, workers could be just paid the federal minimum wage as low as $7.25 an hour. And I have no doubt some of them probably get paid even less than that. I wanted to speak about how the fight for living wages is built into food justice. I was wary of my impending dreams after writing that day. And that night, they came back and said, don't craft something you think others want to hear. Tell your food and food justice journey. Similar to that video we just watched, where the last commentator mentions, it's about access to food, but it's also an access to the story around food, and then the implications of that story around the community that is telling it. My ancestors were moving me to share my story with you, and by sharing it, I'd be including how food justice affects them. And let me just say, when ancestors visit you in your dreams and steer you in this strongly, it's really best to listen and follow through with them, or else they'll come back. So here's the journey. Food in my family has generational trauma. I have a Mexican background. Most of the elders in my family were migrant farm workers at one point in their lives, some of whom still are. Many of them were also immigrants. All of my grandparents worked in the fields or packing plants at one period in their lives. My mom and stepdad used to work in the fields as children. They were as young as 8 years old when they started. They worked hard to get out of that industry as they grew up because they didn't want their children to work in the fields. I remember visiting my Tata Bico in the fields while he was working the tractors. I know part of those visits were because my parents never wanted us to forget where we came from and the hard work our ancestors put in for my current opportunities. Food in my family has love baked into the recipe. Some of the most cherished memories I carry with my family revolve around meal times, from the conversations while making food to the stories that come forth while sitting around the dinner table. I also grew up with large families. I have 23 aunts and uncles. I have 6 siblings and way too many cousins to list. All of that means that I experienced a lot of birthday celebrations throughout the year with a lot of food. Food in my family meant sharing with others. Giving to those who experienced food insecurity was important to us. We always invited others to join us. There was always extra seats, plates, and good food because we considered food, specifically mealtime, a sacred space, and we were called to share with others in need. And while I got those experiences from my family, I have to admit ignorance when it came to knowing about the larger umbrella of food justice. I'm going on 36 years old, and up until about 11 years ago, I never even knew it was a thing. I first learned the term food justice after an experience with my UU congregation. I knew about food insecurity and lumped it in with that right away. And while I wasn't entirely wrong about one of the aspects of food justice, that is still very far from a proper definition. I had to learn the hard way by messing up a lot. And while I can't tell you every aspect of my messing up journey, I want to tell you the very first time I got it majorly wrong, because that's the one that vividly sticks with me. I volunteered to host one UU young adult group meeting at my congregation. I was excited to host, and even the topic would be a conversation revolving around food, genetically modified food to be specific. I got a nice variety of light and heavy snacks and refreshments and was confident in providing a praiseworthy spread. And then it happened. Someone asked if there was anything gluten-free. Another asked what was vegetarian. A third asked about vegan options. And then someone inquired about something dairy-free to eat with the crackers besides meat. A few things fit into some of those asks, but not all. The truth is, I, a carnivore with no dietary restrictions, had bought food I liked, as I planned on taking home any and all leftovers. I felt terrible and small at that moment. Here I was just a few short weeks into finding this group, and I did this with food. I had missed the mark on many of my group's dietary needs. It didn't even cross my mind to ask about those things. I had no clue what to do other than offer my apology. Afterward, I went home embarrassed and felt I had disrespected some folks for not being as inclusive as they had been with me. So I started researching all those things I had messed up on. I was determined to expand and learn so that I didn't make the mistake around food again. As a side note, I did make that mistake again, several times, a lot. And after each failure, I made sure to do better though. I call it my time with the fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning around food justice. My relationship with understanding food justice began to evolve through this, and it still is. As the years have gone by, I've learned more about vegetarians, vegans, gluten-free, keto, plant-based diets, organic, ethically sourced foods, free range, farm to table, food allergies, food sensitivities, fair trade, and so much more. It's really a mouthful when you list them all out like that. I even gave up sugar at one point to see how much it was incorporated into our processed foods. The answer, sugar's in a lot of things that we don't even realize. I began to realize that a food war was occurring, with many battles simultaneously happening, from bans on feeding the homeless, raids on immigrants trying to form unions at food processing plants, the fight for wages for migrant farm workers, to food deserts where options are limited, to owning that the pesticides we must diligently wash off as worrying consumers are most definitely dangerous to those working in the fields. And honestly, just access to affordable, healthy food options and possibilities, because everyone deserves that right. And I want to wade into the new uplifting possibilities. I heard someone giving a talk about food get asked if they were an optimist for the future of food justice. They said, no, I'm not an optimist. And that's because I'm a possibilist. I believe in the active possibilities we can create around food justice instead of remaining in an inactive, optimistic state. I'm going to repeat that. I'm not an optimist, and that's because I'm a possibilist. I believe in the active possibilities we can create around food justice instead of remaining in an inactive, optimistic state. I like to say that I too consider myself a possibilist, and I hope you'll join me as well. One way I've done this is by being proactive in my practices. I have multiple options for various dietary needs whenever I host events. And sometimes when I'm not hosting, if I know the host doesn't actively participate in that way. It's become important to me to make shared spaces more welcoming, where everyone can find acceptance and belonging, especially at the root level of the food being provided. And I have to say, I'm not a vegan or vegetarian, and I currently do not have any dietary restrictions. But now I do my best to make better choices in my daily meals, with less focus on meats, an increase in the veggies, and generally a wider, healthier variety. I shop at farmers markets when I'm able, buy fair trade as available, back food unions, be in solidarity with migrant farm worker groups, support small food businesses, and have a better understanding of where my food comes from. And I still don't get it right all the time, but I'm getting better. I used to be intimidated by the numerous onion layers involved in food justice, yet learning in small doses has helped me develop tools for long haul work, and I know it also works for others. So let's be possibilists together and do small things with great love, because that is how we'll make a big difference. Amen.